So I'm going to show you 3 different ways to create this pavement, in the sense that I'm going to show you how the usual way is, where you input textures and you get your texture and you get your material. Then I'm going to show you how to use the same textures to create displacement, bring that up and make it a bit more realism. And then finally I'm going to show you Railclone, which will actually create the geometry itself and won't be a texture. Yes, there'll be textures on top of the actual cobblestone sets, but that's it. So let's jump into the very first one, which is just using the textures to create our material, quick and simple. So when creating this material, you need to make sure of one thing in particular. You need to make sure you're working in real world coordinates. And what do I mean by that? Well, if I hit stop here, the object I've picked and created this plane, I've made sure to make sure this is checked in the real world map size, and I have it 10 meters by 10 meters. I also have in my textures set the real world scale. If you want this set by default, you can go to File, Preferences, and then use Real World Texture Coordinates and click OK. So when you're plugging this in, you might be asking yourself, well, how do I know what size to use? Because with tiling, you can just use 2 tiles, 3 tiles, but you need to know exact size. So what you do is, a very easy way is, in this particular image, you hit View Image, and you can see all these tiles. Now I know, or you can have it to any size you want, but I know I want it 10 by 10 because these sets are usually 10 by 10, and I mean centimeters. So in counting 1, 2, 3 all the way across, we have 34 across, and down we have another 34. So with that in mind, we know that's 3.4 meters by 3.4 meters. So that means every 3.4 meters, this texture is going to paste itself onto that polygon or whatever geometry you're using. Now in knowing that, all you have to do is plug these in, make sure they're all set to that, click here, and you get this render. And you get that great detail. But now I'm going to show you how you can push it a bit more by using the displacement map. So now if I hit render, you're going to see something slightly different. You're going to see that the surface is actually being pushed up. So this geometry is actually being altered by a map. It's not just faked, it's actually being pushed. How do I do that? Well, first thing is, when you have your new plane, you want to add a Vray displacement mod. So you go here and you go all the way to the bottom and hit Vray displacement mod. You then want to change it to 3D mapping. My displacement is now plugged into my texture, but you also want to drag this into your text map, okay? And plug that in. Then this will decide the amount. Usually whatever you have here, you try and do the opposite here to push it back down. So let's say if I wanted to put that to 5, and then I'll put this at minus 0.025. So now if I go in here and I click render again, you're going to see it's pushing it out even more. It's pushing it pretty much double. It's a bit too much, but that's the idea behind it. You can actually push it. No, now there's one thing you can do is, if you don't like the kind of edges, you can increase the quality. So bringing this down to 1 and then hitting render. It might take a bit longer depending on the PC you're using, how powerful your PC is. Basically, that's the amount of time it's going to take. So once that goes, you'll see it's a bit better quality, but for the amount of processing power you need, it mightn't be worth it, because if I go to my task manager, you'll see I'm using 15 gigabytes just for this scene. So if your computer only has 16 gigabytes, this is going to be a lot to ask. Or if it even has 8 gigabytes, it will be able to do it, but be a lot slower. So just be aware of that when you're using displacement maps. So let's move on to our last one, which is using Railclone, which is actual pieces of geometry to scatter them in an array. So the last way to do a bit of pavement is use the Railclone plugin by i2. Now this is a really good plugin. I really like it. It took me a while to get used to it, but I really like it now. Now what we have to do is we have to set up a few things. So first of all, I've set up this cobblestone here. So I've just added in an edit poly, a turbo smooth, and a bit of noise to create it, and that's it. Then I have my spline, which is going to define the area that it clips, and this is the surface it's going to use. So let's go into a Railclone object and open this up. We're then going to add in an array 2s, and we're going to add it in. We need a segment, we need a spline, and we need a surface. So we know the surface, so click here, add it. We know the spline, which is this, and we know the object. So we have all those loaded in. Now let's load them into the thing. So spline goes into the clipping area, the surface goes into the surface, and this object goes into default. Now one thing you need to do is, when clicking here, you need to go to extend X and Y, and there we have it. Now if I was to go in and render this, this is what we have. So we have something along the lines. Now nothing's textured or has anything like it, just has the max color. So we can see something happening there, but there's a few things we have to change. Now, one of the first things we have to do is we have to add in a gap into all these. So I'm going to add in a transform node. And in here, I'm going to click override padding. And I'm going to put in 1 centimeter in the left and the top. So then when we plug this in, and then plug this into the default, we get our gaps of 1 centimeter. Now I also have a grout I created earlier. That's just a plane and it's just raised up to that point. So if I hit render now, we're starting to get that look. Now we just need to deal with getting a proper texture on this cobblestone. Now in the object, I want to go to deform and I want to go apply box mapping and real world maps size. Then what I want to do is I have this concrete texture and I just want to apply it to my object. I'm going to apply it to my cobblestone set, and you can apply it to your objects as well, whichever one you want, and you can hit apply. Now to add a bit more randomization into our sets, what we're going to do is we're going to go to our macros and we're going to add in a mirror variation and a stepped rotation. In a stepped rotation, we pretty much want to rotate it 360 degrees, so we're rotating it, but we want it in steps of 90 degrees. So it'll rotate 4 times depending on whichever one randomized. Then in the mirror variation, we want to mirror the X and the Y. We don't want to mirror the Z. So then what we can do is we can plug the mirror into the stepped into our default, but then we want to plug this into here. So then we get a bit of variation. And now we can hit render and we're getting a bit better. Now one thing we're going to add a bit more realism. We're going to change some of the levels of each square, the color variation I should say. So how do we do that? So it's simple enough. It comes with Railclone as well. Click here, go to maps and go to general and then go to Railclone Color. And we're going to put this in our default map, and we're also going to plug it into our map 1. Then we're going to plug this into our diffuse and go back to this map and go to the very bottom, and we're going to enable tint. Then I'm going to change the color here to white and this color to black. And I'm going to change this to multiply. Now when we hit render, we get this variation of color. Now obviously it's way too strong right now, so we need to bring that down. I'm going to go back in here. I'm going to say to 5 to say 45%. And then if we go back in, we have that slight variation in color. You can see here, here, and here. And just like that, we can create a believable pavement just using Railclone. And the great thing about this is in Railclone, we could change the one block and it'll change the whole thing. We can change the grout. We can have a lot more power. Whereas if you're just using a texture, you're kind of stuck. You can obviously change the color and stuff, and maybe the scale uniformly, but you have way more powerful when it comes to changing the entire thing in Railclone. And that's how you pretty much create like pavement in 3ds Max. It's a very quick video, but something I just wanted to do.